did want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the projects. You've got the
Okay.
projects themselves, and then the poem and things like that. So I didn't know if you wanted to take a minute to walk through, the projects one at a time and sort of, what did you when you're seeing some of these works, like the Bash Reno project, like as a teacher, I know you encourage them to submit their work when it's really great. Always, you've done that for years, but so what are your takeaways or what are your insights on each project as they come in? It don't have to be like specifically detailed, but it's just more uh, there's such the three that are together and the one that's there, like they're unique projects for the frame, the three
Yeah.
especially. And I got to see several of them, right? So I'm curious, like, what is your perspective as the person who sort of created the situation where the students are engaged in this kind of community engagement, um, outreach, thinking about their place in the world and their connection with people outside the campus. Um, yeah, so I'm intrigued by your thoughts on how these projects went and why they're sort of particularly unique.
Um, so logistically, I bring in a number of speakers from the community. This semester I've had a developer, a state assembly member, a state senator, um, the chair of the Board of County Commissioners, service providers. We had a local journalist come in and talk today. And so I tried to give some exposure to as many different perspectives on the subject matter as possible. And I call it housing and homelessness because for students who to have that kind of emotional engagement that typically goes along with homelessness or the unhoused, I want housing to be there as an option too, because then if they're more pragmatic or more practical or more numerical in their thinking, then that gives them a wider range of options. I want them to know that all of this training that they've done in nonfiction writing over the years is useful beyond fulfilling class requirements. And I want them to know that they can participate in the world around them and participate in a way that's healthy, in a way that's useful to them, and hopefully useful to others as well. They don't have to care about the unhoused to be successful. And then in terms of logistics, each student writes a proposal for a collaborative project. And then they start applying to projects. That's part of the nonfiction, advanced nonfiction writing too. And so the teams develop out of the interest that's generated for the different projects. So there may be two projects in a given class that are similar. And maybe those students will cohere as a group and come up with some hybrid of the different things that they've proposed. More often than not, it's a student who's come up with an unusual idea that is very straightforward and clear in terms of, here's what we're going to do. Here are the people I need for this team. Here's the timetable I'm thinking about. Apply. So there's a number of different factors that go into it. I think because I talk so much about students doing something that matters to them, sometimes it's a little intimidating because they don't want to choose the wrong thing because something else might matter to them more, right? But I think that it's that combination of, it's an idea that I'm interested in, I know what I'm being asked to do, and whatever they're planning to do with this project is doable in the time that we have. So a lot of it is very pragmatic.
Yeah, I think you can see that in the projects that were submitted, right?
Yeah.
What should housing cost for students at U in Reno, right? So where do our meals come from? Like posters, like it's a real world, like these are problems, these are concerns, these are applications. I think you can see that pragmatism in the work. So
And I think part of it too is I keep saying to them, look, you're not going to solve homelessness. You're not going, and it's overwhelming. And I just had to have this conversation with the students today. I said, look, I understand that this can be overwhelming, but you can't respond to it if you can't see it. And so you need to be able to see this in its fullness, or as much of it as you can, so that you can make informed choices about how you respond. Because that's half the finding a response that's worth making. Right. And so they get a little kind of cowed, kind of browbeaten almost, because it's so overwhelming and it's so tragic, and there's so many terrible things happening to people who haven't done anything wrong. But then that optimism piece, it's like, look, you can make a difference. Just take one step, just one little step. That's all you need to do. Just one little step, even if it doesn't get you anywhere near solving a real homelessness problem. If you take that little step, it makes it for you. And if it makes a difference for you, it's going to make a difference for your teammates. And if it makes a difference for your teammates, it's going to make a difference for you, and so on and so on. It's like those old, you're probably not old enough to remember this, but the old Breck shampoo commercials, and they'll tell two friends, right?
yeah.
It's that kind of network activism, network engagement. So you're not trying to fix the problem for those people. You're trying to understand the problem for those people and respond from who and where you are.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think it allows for not only a meaningful engagement, but a personalized engagement, right? And I think that can phase through in all these projects. And even when you're like getting poems by these other individuals, for example, right? There's you can tell there's something about a sincerity in that exchange that has occurred that has allowed that to happen. And that you can't have that level of sincerity if the students themselves aren't personally invested and engaged.
Well, and I'll say too, with that particular project, Stormy is a poet, and she really struggled. I mean, it's an advanced nonfiction course, right? So how do you bring poetry and nonfiction together? And I said, well, think about it like fiction and nonfiction. There's fiction-based poetry, and there's nonfiction-based poetry. And verse doesn't necessarily mean that it's a story or that it's not real. And so she really worked hard to find a way to work with narrative of real people's lives and verse as the vehicle for that. And another thing that she really focused on was how do I use verse in the most meaningful way? And she really settled on this idea of it's about concision. It's saying as much as you possibly can in the most concise and direct way that you can. And so I thought the poems, really turned out well. But I think they turned out well because we had that larger context that the group provided for us. The housing, the Bash project, Jaden's project. They were reluctant to talk about student housing at first because they didn't think that compared to people who were living under a tarp or under a bridge or an overpass or something. And I said, look, this is an equal opportunity worry. It's worrisome for old people. It's worrisome for young people. It's worrisome for wealthy people. It's worrisome for poor people. Certainly, people who are living outdoors and have nothing have to be a primary concern because they are at risk in ways that the rest of us aren't. But again, if you can address this part of it in a meaningful way, then you are creating an opportunity. You're opening a door or a window for others to respond to these other issues in meaningful ways as well. The signs. You know, those students, I mean, they went out and got a printer to make all of those posters for them for free,
Yeah.
which just blew my mind. It's like, who would think of that, right? This isn't an academic process, you know. Um, but they had this idea that they thought a lot of people who are unhoused don't know where to go to get help, which is true. And a lot of people who are unhoused don't speak English as their first language. So, you know, they did them in Spanish and in English. They did, I think, 3 different kinds of subject matter. And they put them up all over the place. And then they gave me the extras, which, you know, I still cherish,
Yeah.
right? So they turn out very differently because each proposer says, okay, this is what interests me. This is the way that I want to make my way into this subject matter. And then the team members are a big part of shaping that. Because I mean, there aren't any, there's no dictatorships in these teams. I mean, it just doesn't play out that way. As much as some of the, you know, as some of the students would like it to be, I'm just going to dole out responsibilities and, you know, kind of watch from on high. You know, it just doesn't work that way.
No, doesn't work.
You know, the newsletter from 321, Annabelle's project, it really, in some ways, is very similar in that I don't think any other students in that class did a newsletter. And you know, what she was trying to do was invite people into the community of education majors and help them to feel some sense of belonging by giving them information about being there. And I thought it was terrific. I thought she did a really nice job.
Yeah. It's really good. And it plays with, you know, it does a nice thing with playing with not only text on the page, but design,
Yep.
and it feels different than the other 3, and it should, because it's a different kind of class. But I think it's you know, it's reflective of those kind of decisions we want them to be making, which is we can't give you guidance on every single detail, but we can give you an orientation how you think about audience reception, how things like visual and textual intersect, how they can help you represent and communicate. Yeah, it's
Well,
again,
I can say as many times as you want, I'm not your only audience.
yeah, I know.
But if I'm the only one who sees it and I'm the one who's grading it, I am the only audience. And so if I want them to write for an audience other than me, that includes me, that I can be a part of, it has to be something beyond turning it into me for a grade. So sending it to the Jump Plus, posting it online, making it available to people on campus, you know, printing out hard copies and putting them up places, you know.
Posters,
I mean, all of those things are ways to engage audiences beyond me. And frankly, I'm just not that interesting, you know. And you know, I mean, we've all had those profs who said, you know, you don't have to agree with me. I'm not your only audience, but you know,
ultimately, yeah, you
we
are.
all have those profs when we know it's like, okay, you say that, and I'm sure you believe that, but right.
Yeah.
So I really want them to be able to
No,
write for other audiences.
yeah, the poster one especially is clearly written for a not you audience, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and, and I love it when they do that. Like it's really hard to convey that sensibility to students unless they're actively putting things into the public sphere, right?
Yep.
Websites,
Yep.
things like that. And there's a tension, right? Be like, how much can we encourage students to identify and put their work out there? But also, how do we get them to realize there's a real world audience without putting their work out there? And I think these projects do a really nice job of sort of splitting that difference, because it's not about how it identifies with the class, it's about solving a real world problem. And
Right.
we
Right.
run into that kind of stuff where like, why would you write a blog for my class and post it on my line? You know, like, well, that's an obvious identifier. But if you are creating content that you're sharing with the world to contribute to benefit a community, to be involved in a problem in the world, it eliminates the need to put like English 401B right on the thing.
Right.
And
Right.
that
Right.
solves it. That solves all the problems, right? Not all the problems, but most of the problems. That's great. Yeah, I like it. Again, I love these projects. I'm so glad you were able to convince them to submit them to us, and we were able to review them and encourage them to publish with us. I'm really excited to see how other people react to them. I do want to sort of take a minute here at the end, as a sort of swan song moment, right? Like,
Yeah,
you've been teaching, you've been hanging out with the jump for since we started, what, 2009? So 2000, I think spring in 2010, right? We had our 2009.
yeah.
That's our first conversation about
Hey,
jump.
there's no other game in town, man.
Listen, it was easy to recruit. I was the only one doing weird stuff. Um, but I'm curious, you've been teaching things that intersect with digital, the media, the composition, the multimedia stuff,
Yeah.
for a long time. And what are some insights and wisdoms you might be able to share with, it's a different generation coming out now. We're at the front edge of generative AI. But still, I'm sure there are practices and guides as a teacher that you've experienced or you've developed or you've sort of internalized over the years, that might be of value to those who are, currently teaching, or those who may be new to teaching in the next couple of years, as a sort of like, here are the things that I maybe would have been nice to know then, but also, us playing with websites back in 2009 is not the same thing as a machine creating my, recipe for dinner.
Right, 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 right.
So, but I'm curious, what
Well,
if,
when I started doing this, we were teaching in freshman comp, we were teaching students to write HTML
yeah,
code
yeah,
or to steal it.
yeah,
I didn't
or
realize it was
leverage,
plagiarism at the time,
leverage.
but it was
Yeah.
total, yeah, it was total plagiarism. Um, when I was in my doctoral program, I did a lot with the current technologies then, because I really saw that the technologies opened up writing in ways that the more traditional approaches kind of locked it down, and it seemed like it really was that choice. Am I going to be part of the tradition down and tells the students that it's their responsibility to get to whatever that lockdown is? Or am I going to open it up and bring in these other options, use my expertise to help the students figure out how to use them in meaningful and productive ways? But I also recognized very early on that the pitch at which technology moved was very fast. And if I stepped away for a moment, I would have a hell of a time catching up again. And so when I was doing my dissertation, it was not on, using technology to teach writing. And inadvertently, I took that step away. And so I could never quite get up again, right? And ever since then, I felt like there was some kind of middle ground that was missing. Either you're total techie or you're, using wax tablets, right? And I think there's a whole range in between. And I think the more the technologies have advanced and evolved, the more that's become true. You can be an effective user of builder of web pages, for instance, without knowing HTML.
Mm-hmm.
You can build an online publication without taking a desktop publishing course. Now, it's better if you have training, but these things are so ubiquitous and so user-friendly and so much easier to use than they used to be. There's a whole range of things there. So one of the things I've really valued increasingly is that the easier the technologies get to use, the more those technologies can become the kind of everyday tools of the classes that I teach, which helps those classes to resonate with students outside of the classroom. So in some ways, it's instead of me deciding what the important medium is, it's me deciding how much I can let go of specifying a medium and taking the expertise and knowledge and practices, pedagogy that surround those media and surround writing those media, communicating via those media, and just opening it up and letting students find the things that are important to them rather than trying to tell them what should be important to them, right? So that's one big take. The second is get out of the way. Set them up so that they can take some risks. set them up so that they can try things and be happy with it, even if it doesn't turn out as well as they had hoped, and get out of the way and support them. It's not information transfer. It's experience facilitation. And so the more I can get out of the way, let them do the things that matter to them, the better the teaching is that I'm doing, I think, and the better the learning is for them, because they can care about it. They're not just a face in the crowd anymore.
Yeah.
So I think the two big takeaways. And, you know, trust the students, have some confidence in them. Don't think you have to lay it out so that they can't possibly cheat. They'll find a way if that's what they want. But what you do when you approach an assignment like that, or approach a course like that, is you so lock it down into your own thinking that there's really no place for them to be there. And they recognize that as a performance, as a demonstration. Here's how much I'm willing to do to comply with your wishes. And that's not teaching or learning. That's endurance.
Yeah, that's great, man. I appreciate it. That's again, you know, I know we have similar orientations to these things, so it's always great to hear other people saying the same things. But I jokingly say all the time that a lot of students' experiences with education is it's a coloring book approach, which is here are the lines, here are the colors,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's paint by number. It's not even coloring book, right?
Yeah.
And at best, I'm gonna give them, you know, like a crazy monkey to draw scribbles on a page, like, you know, and so
Right.
cats or some weird like things that don't make sense together. And I appreciate the sensitivity to which you approach that, which is technology empowers different kinds of thinking, different kinds of writing. We're opening up the space. And you speak deeply to my heart when you say, just get out of their way. This is legitimately a pedagogical 101 core value for me, right? And my job is to simply get out of the way. that's
Well, in a lot of ways, this goes back to my years and years in writing centers. You know, the writer in a writing center tutorial, the writer is always supposed to be in charge. You know, your job is to collaborate with them and help them accomplish what they're trying to do. My teaching is the same thing. And it could very well be that it's because my first adjunct job was at the school where I did my undergrad, and I didn't have a clue. So, but I knew faculty, so I could go to my favorite prof and say, hey, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. How do I do this? And she was the director of the writing center and said, just come to the writing center trainings. They'll help you. They'll help you figure it out. And I've just been, you know, expanding on that ever since, really.
Yeah, that's great. That's incredible. Well, listen, I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us and share insights. The projects are great. I'm so happy we could do this kind of issue around your work and around the students' work, and to celebrate the kind of commitments you're making to students. In fact, as you know, we had multiple projects from your class submitted that we've tried to publish. For whatever reasons, they didn't always come through, but these 4 are a really great representation of the kinds of things your students are doing to make a difference in the world and also to do cool stuff in class. So it's like a win-win for me. So I just wanted to say thank you for that and for all your service for the jump over the years, and give you a moment to sort of any last thoughts before we wrap up today.
It's been you know, this sounds hokey, but it has been such a privilege to work with you and work with the jump. You have expanded my horizons regularly about what teaching can be and what writing and learning can be. So, you know, whether it's blame or gratitude, you know, you can choose.
I'll take the blame.
But I think you know, the jump does such important work, and I'm still so flattered, even after all this time, to be able to be a part of it. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much for the journal, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this particular. Well, I couldn't be more excited about what's going on here.
Awesome.